There is a place on this earth where the rules that govern the natural world seem to bend, where predators grow to sizes that strain belief, where creatures carry enough poison to drop a man in minutes, and where entire species have evolved in such isolation that science is still naming them. The Amazon rainforest covers an expanse so vast that the Western mind struggles to hold it whole. A living, breathing cathedral of green that shelters more species of animal, bird, insect, and reptile than any other ecosystem on the planet. And it conceals almost everything it contains, parceling out glimpses only to those patient enough, quiet enough, and lucky enough to earn them. Explorers and river travelers who venture into its depths quickly learn that the jungle does not announce its wildlife. Animals here are not performers. They do not wait to be seen. What researchers have documented, what local communities have known across generations, and what the jungle occasionally chooses to reveal paints a portrait of a world still largely beyond our reach and our full understanding. The deeper you travel from the river's edge, the more the forest changes around you. The light thins to a permanent green dusk. The sounds shift, bird calls growing stranger and more layered, the drip of condensation from leaves 30 meters overhead, and beneath it all, the occasional splash from water you cannot yet see. It is in this world, humid, ancient, and barely mapped, that the animals of the Amazon have perfected survival across millions of years of competition, adaptation, and extraordinary ecological pressure. Among all the creatures that local communities and research expeditions have encountered in these waters, none inspires quite the same mixture of reverence and dread as the anaconda. Researchers who study Amazonian reptiles describe an animal that represents one of the most refined ambush predators the natural world has ever produced. A body plan so successful that it has required essentially no modification across tens of millions of years. Local river communities speak of encounters with animals of staggering size, lengths and girths that serious herpetologists have struggled to verify precisely, but which the frequency and consistency of such accounts makes difficult to entirely dismiss. The anaconda is not a creature of the deep forest. It belongs to the Varzea, the seasonally flooded forest edges, and to the murky oxbow lakes that form where rivers curve and slow and grow still and dark as tea. Researchers have documented anacondas resting motionless for days in the shallows of these waters, their bodies almost indistinguishable from submerged logs, waiting with a patience that has no analogue in human experience. The ambush, when it comes, happens in a fraction of a second, a lunge from stillness that river travelers describe as seeming to tear the surface of the water apart without any warning. It is not venom that the anaconda deploys. It constricts, wrapping its body around prey in successive coils and tightening each time the animal exhales, until breath and heartbeat alike become impossible. Researchers note that the force exerted by a large anaconda's coils exceeds what most modern hydraulic tools can produce, concentrated into a body that can hold a struggling animal completely immobile while remaining unhurried, patient, and in total control. Local communities who live alongside these rivers have developed entire bodies of knowledge around reading the water. The stillness that means something large is resting beneath. The way fish scatter toward shore in the seconds before the surface breaks. What makes the anaconda so persistent in the imagination of everyone who has entered its range is not simply its size. It is the quality of its patience, an animal that appears to exist at a different pace from everything around it, operating on a timescale closer to geology than to the frantic urgency of warm-blooded life. Researchers who have fitted anacondas with tracking devices document animals that may travel almost no horizontal distance for weeks, holding position in a productive ambush site while the forest moves and breathes and changes around them, as patient as the river itself. Local communities say the anaconda does not hunt. It waits for hunting to become unnecessary, for the river to deliver what it needs, as the river always eventually does. Not all the Amazon's most formidable predators announce themselves from the water. Some move through the trees, silent as shadows, and some simply watch from branches you never thought to check. The jaguar is not the largest cat on Earth, but researchers and naturalists who have spent time in the Amazon consistently describe it as the one that leaves the deepest impression, not through aggression, but through the quality of its presence, the sense that the forest around it reorganizes itself slightly to accommodate something that belongs there completely. Local Kayapo communities have understood the jaguar as something beyond a simple predator for longer than written records extend into this region. In their tradition, as in several other Amazonian peoples' cosmologies, the jaguar occupies the threshold between the visible world and the world behind it, a creature that moves between states of being as easily as it moves between riverbank and canopy, between darkness and first light. Researchers documenting jaguar behavior in the Amazon note that sightings are rare, not because the population is critically low, but because the animal chooses when to be seen, a conclusion that is hard to escape after enough time in the field watching this animal. What makes the Amazon jaguar distinct from its counterparts elsewhere is size. Animals from deep Amazonian populations tend to run substantially heavier than those studied in drier or more fragmented habitats, a fact researchers attribute to the extraordinary prey density of the undisturbed forest interior, where peccary, capybara, tapir, and deer populations are maintained by a plant community that never stops producing food. Explorers who have tracked jaguars through the flooded Igapo regions report an animal as comfortable swimming as walking, a predator that hunts cayman in their own element, dragging animals that weigh more than the average adult human from the water, with what witnesses consistently describe as unsettling ease and economy of effort. The jaguar's relationship to the river is something that surprises many people encountering these animals for the first time. Most cats avoid water with a conviction that approaches principle. The jaguar enters it without hesitation, and researchers who have watched these animals fish, lying at the edge of the water, one enormous paw extended to flip prey to the bank, describe a technique that is patient, precise, and clearly refined through experience. Local communities along the larger river systems say that a jaguar who regularly fishes a particular stretch of riverbank will sometimes permit a fisherman in a canoe to pass at close distance without reacting, having determined, through its own observation, that the fisherman is not a threat. There are rivers in the Amazon basin so remote that research teams have spent weeks traveling upstream without encountering another human being. Along these waterways, the giant river otter has carved out a claim to apex predator status that surprises most people encountering the species for the first time. Researchers who study these animals describe them as operating with a degree of cooperative intelligence that places them alongside dolphins and primates in discussions of animal cognition, which is a remarkable thing to say about a species that most people associate with the word playful. Local communities along the remote river systems that giant otters still inhabit consistently describe them with a mixture of affection and wariness. These are animals that do not retreat from human presence the way most Amazonian wildlife does. They observe, they vocalize, they investigate, they follow. Explorers who have camped near giant otter territories report waking to find the animals circling their canoes, examining equipment with a systematic curiosity that researchers note is characteristic of the species in areas where they have not been hunted. What the giant river otter hunts, it hunts as a family, and the hunt itself is worth watching at length. Researchers have documented coordinated herding behavior, the family group working in precise formation to drive fish into shallower water or against the bank, cutting off escape routes with a precision that suggests genuine communication between individuals, not simply parallel action. The family holds its territory with a vocal insistence that carries across the water. Long, complex calls that researchers have recorded and partially decoded, finding individual signatures that allow family members to identify one another across distance. Even black cayman, the armored crocodilians that most other Amazonian animals treat with extreme caution, will move away from a bank where a giant otter family is actively foraging. This is not a small thing. The cayman is among the oldest and most successful predator designs in the history of life on this planet, and the otter makes it move. Researchers interpret this not as simple aggression, but as territorial assertion backed by the confidence of a coordinated group, the otter family operating as a unit capable of mobbing and harassing even an animal that outweighs any individual member by an enormous margin. The black cayman itself demands attention, because it is easy to underestimate a creature whose form has not needed to change significantly in tens of millions of years. Researchers working the river systems of the western Amazon describe animals that grow to lengths that challenge the casual assumptions most people carry about what crocodilians reach in this hemisphere. Unlike its relative, the spectacled cayman, which tolerates disturbed and human-adjacent environments with some flexibility, the black cayman is an animal of the deep river systems, the flooded forest, and the remote oxbow lakes, where human presence is minimal and the forest is old. Local communities who navigate the Blackwater river systems at night know to watch for the cayman's eye shine, that amber glow that appears in the beam of a torch at the river's edge, hovering just above the waterline in numbers that can, in certain seasons and certain places, stretch for as far as the light carries. Researchers note that the black cayman is not an indiscriminate predator. It is a patient one, and patience in this context means something more active than simply waiting. It will hold position for hours in the shallows of a floodplain forest, waiting for the moment when a capybara, a peccary or a tapir comes to the water's edge, adjusting its position so subtly and so slowly that the prey animal, arriving cautiously, never registers the change in the water. What the black cayman shares with the anaconda and with the jaguar in its own way is an orientation toward time that has no parallel in warm-blooded experience. Researchers who have spent extended time observing these animals describe a quality of awareness that they find difficult to categorize in standard behavioral terms. The cayman is aware of far more than it acts on. It measures what it perceives, categorizes it, waits to see what develops, and acts, or does not act, with an economy of motion that makes the eventual strike, when it comes, look almost casual. High above the river systems, above the cayman's domain, and above the anaconda's reach, the Amazon canopy is ruled by a different kind of predator entirely. The harpy eagle is not a common sight. Researchers who study it describe spending weeks in known harpy territories without a confirmed sighting. And this is a bird with a wingspan approaching 2 meters and talons that exceed the span of a human hand. Local Yanomami communities whose territories overlap with harpy eagle nesting ranges carry detailed knowledge of the bird's behavior accumulated across generations of careful watching. They describe it as a forest spirit wearing the body of a bird, an assessment that researchers who have watched harpy eagles hunt tend to find less metaphorical than it initially sounds, and more like precise description. The harpy eagle does not soar and stoop like a hawk hunting open ground. It moves through the canopy itself, threading between trunks and branches at speeds that researchers consistently describe as physically improbable for an animal of its size, using its broad, rounded wings as control surfaces to navigate a three-dimensional obstacle course at extraordinary velocity. What it hunts in that canopy is not the small prey one might expect from a forest bird. Researchers have documented harpy eagles taking monkeys, including large howler monkeys, snatching them from branches in motion with talons that close with a force researchers estimate as sufficient to cause immediate incapacitation of virtually any prey animal the bird could carry. Local communities describe the hunting harpy as appearing without any warning that prey animals detect in time. One moment the canopy is ordinary, and then something has happened in it that cannot be undone. The harpy eagle's relationship to its territory illuminates something fundamental about how the Amazon's apex predators work. Researchers tracking individual birds have found that they know every prey-bearing tree in their range, every fruiting platform that reliably draws monkeys, every roost tree used by sloths, every watercourse that concentrates mammal traffic across the seasons. The territory is not empty space. It is a mental geography built across years of observation and refined across the eagle's multi-decade lifespan into something that functions less like instinct and more like expertise, accumulated through experience. Researchers note that juvenile harpy eagles make significantly different hunting decisions than adults, choosing more accessible prey, taking longer to commit to strikes, abandoning pursuits that an experienced adult would have converted. On the forest floor and in the understory below the harpy's domain, there are creatures that defend themselves not through size or speed or cooperation, but through chemistry. The poison dart frogs of the Amazon are among the most studied and least fully understood organisms in this ecosystem. Animals that have resolved the problem of survival in a world full of predators by making consumption of themselves a thing no predator can afford to repeat. Researchers who work in the field have described the experience of encountering their first wild specimen as briefly disorienting. An animal that could sit comfortably on a thumbnail, moving through the leaf litter with an unhurried confidence that makes no ecological sense until the reason for it registers. It does not hide, it does not freeze. It walks openly across the most exposed surfaces it can find, advertising itself in colors that the human eye registers immediately as signals, because that is precisely what they are, encoded over millions of years of interaction between these frogs and every predator that has attempted to eat them. Researchers have documented dozens of distinct species within the Amazon basin, each carrying its own chemical signature, its own color vocabulary, its own version of the same essential message, that anything which places this animal in its mouth will not make the same mistake twice. Local shamanic traditions across the western Amazon have understood the chemistry of these frogs in ways that Western pharmacology is only beginning to appreciate. Some communities have used the skin secretions of certain species in controlled ritual contexts for longer than any written record survives to document, understanding the threshold between effective dose and dangerous dose with a precision that required generations of extraordinarily careful empirical observation. Western pharmacologists have identified compounds in these frog secretions with potential applications in medicine that are still being mapped and evaluated. The jungle had already indexed this pharmaceutical library. It simply had not shared the catalogue, and it required communities who had lived alongside these frogs for thousands of years to translate even a fraction of what those vivid colors announced to the forest. There are moments in the Amazon that reframe every assumption a traveler carries into the forest. One of them arrives when the forest opens onto a stretch of river, and something in the water surfaces, something much larger than expected, moving with a slow, deliberate grace that suggests absolute ownership of its element. Another arrives when the canopy overhead erupts in sound and motion, and a shape drops through the foliage, not falling, but diving, wings folded, talons forward, at a speed that leaves the eye unable to fully track it. But perhaps the most disorienting moment the Amazon reserves for those who pay attention is a smaller one. It comes when a researcher or traveler pauses and notices, among the debris of the world's most complex ecosystem, something brilliant. Something that has no business being that color in a world that rewards camouflage above all else. Something that sits completely still in plain sight with the serenity of an animal that has never needed to learn fear. Imagine kneeling there, watching this animal the size of your thumbnail navigate the leaf litter. Around you, several meters away in the dark water at the forest edge, something else is resting. Something that has been there since before you arrived and will remain long after you leave. Somewhere in the mid-canopy, an eye that can see the movement of a monkey through 200 meters of broken canopy light is tracking something that has nothing to do with you. You are inside something vast, and it is, for this moment, allowing you to be there. This is what researchers describe when they try to explain what years of fieldwork in the Amazon means to them. Not the individual encounters, though those persist, but the cumulative experience of spending time inside a system so complex and so alive that the distinction between observer and observed gradually dissolves. The anaconda does not know it is being studied. The harpy eagle does not perform for the camera trap. The jaguar, which could, if it chose, make itself known to every living thing within a kilometer radius, moves through the forest in a silence so complete that researchers describe it as leaving only the sense of a presence after it has passed. Not the animal itself, but the quality of the air it moved through. There are animals in the Amazon that even experienced field researchers have seen only once or twice in careers measured in decades. The giant river otter family groups that persist in the most remote headwater systems represent populations that have never been significantly exposed to hunting pressure or human disturbance. Researchers who have reached these systems describe the otter family's response to their canoes not as flight, but as investigation. A behavioral pattern that almost certainly represents what this species was like across its entire range, before the pressures of recent centuries compressed the surviving populations into the most inaccessible corners of the basin. What all of these animals share: the anaconda patient in the shallows, the jaguar reading the forest floor, the harpy eagle descending through canopy at improbable speed, the giant otter coordinating a hunt in clear water, the black cayman motionless at the river's edge, the poison dart frog walking openly through the leaf litter, is a relationship to the Amazon that is measured in geological time. These animals did not arrive in the Amazon. They were made by it, shaped by millions of years of selection pressure in an ecosystem so complex that modern science has barely begun to describe its interactions with any completeness. The forest floor that the poison dart frog walks across is itself a living system, not simply a surface, but a community of fungi, bacteria, insects, and root networks so interdependent that researchers sometimes describe it as a single distributed organism, with the frogs and the leaf litter and the decomposing wood all functioning as components of something that has no precise boundary and no edge. The black cayman resting in the flooded forest during the high water season is surrounded by fish navigating through the drowned trees, foraging on fallen fruit, reproducing in the flooded understory. And the cayman is aware of all of it, tracking the movement of prey through its lateral line as much as through its eyes, reading the river as a medium that carries information in every direction simultaneously. The jaguar's range contains all of this. Its territory map is written in the forest itself, in the game trails that cross and recross the root systems, in the muddy banks that record every foot that has passed, in the scratch marks on certain trees that the jaguar renews on a schedule that other jaguars read and respect. Researchers note that in areas where jaguar populations are intact, where the territory ranges are large enough and the prey density is high enough, the presence of jaguars restructures the behavior of virtually every other large mammal in the forest. Not through constant predation, but through the threat of predation, which is itself information that cascades through the entire food web and shapes where animals go, when they go there, and how they behave when they arrive. Researchers working across this ecosystem describe what they call the texture of a healthy rainforest, a quality of aliveness that is palpable even before any specific animal becomes visible. The way a forest with its apex predators intact feels different from one without them. The sounds are different. The way smaller animals move is different. The silences have a different character. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of things that are very still for very deliberate reasons. These are the animals that the Amazon offers to those willing to move carefully and wait quietly and resist the impulse to announce themselves in a world that rewards exactly the opposite of announcement. The researchers who have built careers in this forest are, in an important sense, students of concealment, people who have spent years learning to read the evidence of presence rather than presence itself, the paw print in the mud, the bark stripped from a tree at a height that eliminates most candidates, the pattern of scatter in a fish school that suggests something large moved through it minutes before you arrived. The forest keeps its animals the way it keeps everything it values, present, alive, and almost entirely on its own terms. Not because they hide exactly, though most of them do most of the time, but because the forest is vast enough that it simply contains them, the way it contains everything else it chooses to keep from the world, beyond its canopy. Researchers who have worked here for decades consistently say the same thing. They have seen more of this forest than almost anyone alive, and they have seen almost none of it. Estimates suggest the Amazon harbors somewhere between 10 and 15% of all terrestrial species on the planet, in a region that represents roughly 4% of the planet's land surface. Local communities that have maintained continuous presence in this ecosystem across thousands of years carry knowledge of perhaps a fraction of that biodiversity in practical, applied form. Western science, with all its instruments and satellite imagery and genetic sequencing technology, has formally described perhaps another fraction. The rest remains as it has always remained, present, complex, alive, and known only to itself. There are moments in the field that researchers return to, moments that stay. A jaguar print in soft mud at the river's edge, still filling with water, so fresh that the animal that made it is almost certainly still within earshot. A giant otter surfacing 20 meters from the canoe, making eye contact with the researcher for several seconds with an expression of frank assessment before sliding below the surface and not reappearing. A harpy eagle calling from somewhere in the canopy above. The sound located nowhere in particular, coming from everywhere and nowhere, the forest itself seeming to have made it. These are the moments the forest allows. They are not performances. They are not coincidences. They are the small, accidental revelations of a system so rich and so indifferent to human presence that fragments of its reality surface constantly. In the corner of a camera frame, in the sound from a patch of flooded forest, a researcher passes without stopping, not knowing what was watching. The poison dart frog will continue walking openly across the forest floor long after this observation ends. The anaconda will hold its position in the flooded Igapo through the next 10,000 seasons without any particular awareness that something called science has been attempting to measure it. The jaguar will read the night forest through senses that our instruments are only beginning to approximate, and the harpy eagle will descend through canopy at velocities that still challenge high-speed cameras to capture, and the black cayman will watch the river with those amber eyes that have seen more of this earth than we remember to imagine. And the giant otter family will call to each other in their layered language across a remote blackwater river that no road has yet reached. And the poison dart frog will sit on its leaf and carry its chemistry like a quiet declaration that the forest makes its own rules and always has. The Amazon keeps its animals as it keeps everything it values, close, mostly hidden, and entirely on its own terms. Perhaps that is the only arrangement that has ever truly worked, and perhaps that is the arrangement worth protecting above all others. If the call of the wild still reaches you, if the thought of creatures that have never needed to know the sound of a road still pulls something in your chest, then you already know where to look. Secrets of the Amazon jungle is where every whisper the rainforest allows to escape finds its voice. Subscribe and venture deeper, because the forest has barely begun to show what it holds.